I've just seen the strength of the coal ash workers themselves. One in the community just passed away recently, which was a huge loss. I've seen the strengths of their wives. I mean, the only reason their families are doing this is because they don't want it to happen to someone else. I mean, they can't reverse their spouses or their own illnesses. It's too late for that, but they don't want TVA or TDEC or any other governmental, federal, whatever body to lie. You know, we think it's easy not to lie, but looking at TVA and how unaccountable it is, it's definitely something to work on. Well, they've gone through hell, and you know, it's been years and years, a decade and counting, of just a complete disaster based on communication with coal ash workers, their wives, their families. They just weren't told of what was happening. They weren't informed, and coal ash wasn't really a conversation based on my understanding, and until the last few years with TVA. It really wasn't something that was discussed as toxic or dangerous to people like coal ash workers at Kingston. It was just dirt that you had to scoop up and clean up, or water down and transport somewhere else. So I think TVA was completely, and we know TVA was intentional in lying to the workers about what they were dealing with, as was Jacobs Engineering, the party they contracted. And the fact that deception took the lives, sickened, and hurt families so profoundly is definitely reason enough to keep moving forward. My name is Isabella. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Nashville, but I'm a student at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and I am involved with a few different things in East Tennessee and Knoxville. I'm with the Sunrise Movement, which is a movement to pass a Green New Deal, and I'm also involved with some folks in Claxton, Tennessee, working around a fossil plant transition. I've lived there my whole life. My mom is from there, my mom's family. My dad moved there to be a musician. Seeing Nashville kind of explode in its growth has been really interesting, and has elevated issues like, gentrification has really changed the makeup of the city, and people have had to move and leave. And when a city balloons, it's interesting to see how people who have lived there their whole lives get affected. I love Knoxville for a lot of different reasons. I think coming from Nashville, it wasn't that big of a transition, but it's definitely different. Knoxville just seems more down to earth in a lot of ways. It's just a really sort of comforting web of people. And I think the reason I love Knoxville is people have each other's backs here. Outdoor areas in East Tennessee are beautiful, obviously the Smokies. I also like just going to parks in Knoxville, like Iams, the Quarry. There's a lot of really beautiful natural spaces here, and I think Knoxville really kind of recognizes the importance of urban wilderness, really kind of cherishing nature. And as far as being in Knoxville, I mean, there's just so many different music scenes, restaurants, people to kind of talk to, get to know. But I would definitely say the outdoor spaces are kind of my favorite place to go on a daily basis. Even those few hundred miles, there's a lot of difference with the people who are leading those areas, the resources. But I do think parallels, in both places, you're still working under leaders that don't listen to what you're saying in a lot of ways when it comes to the Green New Deal, climate change, all that. The Sunrise Movement is a national movement. It's youth-led, so folks are generally in their 20s, early 30s who are involved with it. And it was started in 2019 as an effort to combat climate change and pass a Green New Deal. And our hub, which is basically a chapter of the national movement, was started in early 2019, kind of along with the movement. Essentially, our hub is kind of a collection of different students, young people, organizers, just people interested in kind of doing different organizing work in Knoxville. A lot of our work is centralized around the Tennessee Valley Authority, around City Council, and around the potential for Knoxville to kind of orient itself in more of a climate justice direction. We've done climate strikes, rallies, we've made different art, banners, really just trying to get that visual message out there that it's time for a transition away from fossil fuels. I think that's why Sunrise has changed my life so much, is because of the power I felt. It's not easy, I think, organizing around climate in Tennessee in the South, because I mean, look who's politically in charge. It's not hard to see that, people still think climate change isn't a priority. But I think whenever we have done direct actions, really targeting the politicians that we're standing up to, the victories and successes depend on kind of where different hubs are. And I think for Knoxville, we're not asking for what we see as much. A city council that prioritizes a climate justice agenda and a Green New Deal for Knoxville. Thinking about the TVA, which numerous other groups are organizing around in East Tennessee and in the South and Appalachia. A TVA that says no to all fossil fuels and really transitions itself to completely green, clean energy. What we see as wins for our hub or what we see as wins for the area that we're organizing in. I am an intern with SOCM, Statewide Organizing for Community Empowerment, and I've been doing work with SOCM for about a year and a half, give or take now. It's a really cool group of people. There have been several meetings with Anderson County where the fossil plant is located. There have been community meetings, kind of strategizing on what can be done. It's really an amazing group of people who have been through a lot, and I'm really honored to be a part of that. We're essentially trying to address the closing of Bull Run Fossil Plant, which is operated by the Tennessee Valley Authority. And the huge issue kind of in relation to that is coal ash. And so the community has really tried to work around, okay, how do we address coal ash? What's going to happen to it? How do we, get TVA's attention? Thinking about the idea of a community in transition, we think about the Green New Deal, transitioning away from fossil fuels, from, bad energy. I see Claxton as kind of the epitome of that because people are getting sick and hurt and affected by this coal ash, and they're trying to move away from it while still keeping in mind what the workers in their community, the community members need. I think the TVA has the potential to be a really amazing thing. It came out of the New Deal in the 30s, and so it was originally intended, and technically still is, to provide jobs to hundreds of thousands of workers across Tennessee and the South. And it did do that, but I think, slowly it developed into a more privatized corporate entity, which I think is problematic because the communities it was located in and impacting did not have a say in how TVA was operating as it became more of a private kind of entity. I think when we're thinking about the Green New Deal, which this is kind of an obvious connection in the New Deal, there's a thread there. And I think this is the perfect moment for TVA to not only move away from non-renewable energy sources and fossil fuels, but also transition to a public model, which I think folks have probably said a lot in these interviews, but it's just something that needs to happen. And I'm hoping that TVA will be more inclusive and prioritize the communities that it's involved with in its work. Considering TVA as a federal entity, there are a lot of responsibilities. Taking into account and even kind of representing the communities that they should be responsible for. Really paying attention to community leaders and organizers in the policies and laws that they're addressing. I just see the federal government as a pretty far away place. It just doesn't seem like a very present place here in East Tennessee, especially with the TVA not being controlled by people. Thinking about an example, I think just returning power and control of power to the public is a way that the federal government, I think, can mitigate a lot of miscommunication and wrongdoings. Environmental justice to me means a lot of different things. I think it means, first of all, reparations and kind of mitigating or reversing harms in communities that have been affected by environmental injustice, so environmental racism, workers' rights, and unsafety. So I think it means, first of all, taking a look at who's already been affected by environmental wrongdoing, like Bull Run Fossil Plant, which is likely released lots of contamination into the surrounding groundwater, which thus affects communities, or Kingston, where workers were not protected in dealing with toxic coal ash. The first step of kind of thinking about environmental justice is looking at what wrongdoings have already occurred, and then the next step would be, okay, thinking about these, how do we move to a future where everybody has equal opportunity and resources? And I think I see environmental justice as healthcare, housing. We all live on this planet, but a lot of people have different rights and privileges than others. So I think it means having a holistic mindset about our roles on this planet, prioritizing, taking care of our planet, but also prioritizing people's daily needs. needs as well. Well, I hope it still maintains its sense of community in the sense that everybody there knows each other, has a reliance somewhat on a lot of people in that community. So I hope that that sense of spirit is maintained first and foremost. I hope it doesn't change in the sense that the people there, I think that needs to obviously stay the same. Any kind of decision making about Claxton needs to be made by those communities, whether that's different council members communicating with community members being elected or representing, the place that they live. I see green infrastructure and green housing as a huge part of a community like Claxton. I think really it's more about public involvement, so I really hope that the groups and companies that are in Claxton center the voices of the people that live there. Hopefully seeing regular community meetings, convenings like we have been seeing is kind of transforming Claxton into a safer place for people to live. I hope to see a lot of council members and other leaders addressing the police force here in Knoxville. There have been countless instances of police brutality, misconduct, and I hope that that remains a priority in organizers' minds as well as council members. I hope that council members start addressing that soon, because only 1 or 2 people on the city council are actually talking about it. The mayor is not. I hope that racial justice in the sense of the police, of housing, of kind of redlining in Knoxville is addressed, because I don't think that we can have climate legislation until that's addressed, at least in some part. I also hope that Knoxville just adopts a more climate-oriented mindset after that. Green infrastructure, really making nature spaces and green spaces accessible to everyone who lives here. And I hope that things like public housing, healthcare are also centered. I think there just needs to be a lot less focus that Knoxville is placing on things like police or drug enforcement, and rather on the resources people need. I feel like my generation is probably one of the first to be born into what we know about the climate crisis. Obviously, companies back in the 70s knew about it, but I think how it was making the news and how it was becoming a public crisis, and as I was growing up, I haven't ever known not climate change, if that makes sense. And I was never affected by environmental injustice personally. A lot of family members were affected by wildfires in Gatlinburg, a few others by drought out west. But personally, it was never something that I was facing directly. It was just scary because it was such a far off thing. So I think coming to East Tennessee, finding that group of people who are aware of what it's like to grow up in a climate crisis and are aware of kind of all the interconnections with racial injustice and healthcare injustice, it's a really good group of people. I find it to be a family, so I guess that's kind of why I'm involved with it. I'm really inspired by the people's work that I'm surrounded by. I think about that question a lot, and I think the term Appalachia even can be tokenized, right? Like Appalachia, it's in desperate condition, it has these disparities, and people want to fix it, right? Without even talking to Appalachians themselves. I've just really tried to listen to the wisdom of people and the people that I've interacted with, like Sharon. I mean, she's just an amazing source of community wisdom. I think kind of approaching people about what their needs are and what they think has been really important. And that sort of, I think, influences what I think about like a community in transition. It's like approaching those people and what they need as someone who isn't from here. Letting people ask you for things or ask people what they need. And I think that's a pretty basic concept in any organizing space. I've really just tried to be a resource or point of information for people if they need that. It's sometimes uncomfortable to be like, well, I don't know how to help because I haven't lived here. I'm not technically a community member, but it's also a really comforting thing too when people there welcome you into their space and welcome your perspective.